Welcome back to another Roblox Studio tutorial. In today's video, we're going to take a look at some different things you can do with lighting effects. So in this example here, we have a bed that you can click on. It's going to open up a little confirmation dialog, and if I press yes, it's going to make the brightness go down to 0, and then after that, it'll make it bright again, kind of like a Minecraft effect. Alright, so let's go ahead and dive in and see how we can do this in Roblox Studio. Alright, so let's go ahead and get started. The first thing we're going to do is get a bed, and you can either make this yourself or get one from the toolbox. If you're going to be getting it from the toolbox, try to look for one with this symbol right here. These are marked as higher quality items, so you're not going to run into too many issues with these. But for anything that you get from the toolbox, you always want to double check it to make sure there's no hidden scripts inside any of the parts. Once you have the bed model, the next thing we're going to do is add a click detector to one of the parts. So in my case, I'm just going to highlight the model and then look for one of the main parts of the bed. Okay, so this right here looks like a pretty good chunk of the bed, so I'm going to add my click detector to this part right here. To do that, I'm just going to click on the plus sign and then click on click detector. I'm also going to be adding a script to this part, so I'm going to click on the plus sign and then add a script. Before we start writing the script, we're going to be adding a remote event into replicated storage. So go ahead and find replicated storage and click on the plus sign. We're going to be adding a remote event. After you add the remote event, we're going to rename it to screen change. So you can just right click, press rename, and then change the name of it. Okay, so once you have your remote event and you renamed it to screen change, we're going to start with that script up here. So the first thing we're going to do on the script is say script.parent. And then after that, we're going to say .click detector. After click detector, we're going to say .mouse click. So that'll be when the player clicks on the part. We're going to connect this with a function. Inside this function, we're going to trigger the remote event, and we can do that by saying game.replicated storage. Then we're going to say wait for child. We're going to be waiting for the screen change. And then after that, we're going to say and fire client. And then inside here, we're going to put player. So this player is also going to go inside this parentheses here. So whichever player clicks on the bed, it's going to store that player inside this variable here. And that's the client that we're going to trigger the remote event for. The next thing we're going to do is create a simple GUI that once the player clicks on the bed, it's going to pop this up on the screen and ask them if they want to sleep or not. To do that, start by locating the starter GUI. And then we're going to be adding a screen GUI inside of that. Go ahead and rename that screen GUI to sleep. Inside that screen GUI, we're going to be adding a frame. For this frame, all I did was change the style of it. So I went down to the style section and chose the style right here. But you can choose whatever style you want to, or you can customize it by changing the different properties here. Inside the frame, we're going to be adding 3 different objects. We're going to be adding 2 buttons, which are these buttons right here. And we're also going to be adding a text label, which is this part right here. So just as a quick example, let me go ahead and recreate this frame real quick. So starting here, I'm going to add a frame. The first thing I'm going to do for this frame is change the style. So I'm going to locate the style section and then just pick a random style. Let's go ahead and do drop shadow. The next thing I'm going to do is make it a little bit larger, so I'm going to locate the size section. I'm going to make the second set of numbers 0 for both of them. And then what I'm going to do instead is change the first set of numbers inside each grouping. The first part is the percentage of the screen that's going to take up left to right. So let's try 0.25. Okay, so that's going to be about 25% of the screen. And then for the other part, it's going to be the up and down direction. So let's try 0.25. You can see this one is a little bit larger than the one I have above, but once you set the numbers initially, then you can just use the drag to change it. And you can see it's changing the numbers here. So what this is going to do for you, it's going to scale it. So whichever screen size you have, it's always going to be about 17% in the X direction and about 19% in the Y direction. Okay, so after that, I'm going to add my different objects. So I'm going to add that text label. Just like before, I'm going to change the size of it. So I'm going to change this one to 0. And this one to 0. For the X part, let's try about 95%. So I'm going to change that to 0.95. And then for the Y part, let's try 0.3, so about 30%. So now these 95% and 30% is not the whole screen, but it's a percentage of the frame. Okay, so that looks pretty good, and I'll just drag it a little bit over. Okay, so I'm going to add those buttons now. So this is going to be a text button. Let's go ahead and adjust the size of it, and then we'll make a copy of it. Okay, so just like I did before, I'm going to change those initial numbers to zeros. And then for this, let's make it 45%, so almost half. And then for the other part, we'll do the same, so 0.45. And we'll see how that looks. Okay, so that looks pretty good. So at this point, I'm just going to make a copy of it. So I'm going to select it and then press Control D. And that'll make a copy of the same size that you can just drag over a little bit. The rest of the design work I'm going to leave up to you, and you can change the different properties to change how it looks. Just make sure when you're done that your No button is called No button with a capital N and a capital B, and the same for the Yes button. Okay, so once you have your frame and the different objects, we're going to be adding a local script inside the frame. We're going to start this local script by saying local frame, and that's going to be equal to script.parent. And then initially, we don't want this frame to be visible on the screen, so we're going to say frame.visible is equal to false. And then we want this frame to appear whenever the player clicks on the bed, and we know the player clicks on the bed whenever that remote event gets triggered. So we're going to say game.replicate-storage, wait for child. Here we're going to put the same thing, so screen change. And then we're going to say .onClient event. We're going to say connect. We're connecting this with a function. Inside this function, we're going to start by saying frame.visible is equal to true. And before we go too much farther, let's just go and stop here and check to make sure this works. So we should have it whenever the player clicks on the bed, that we have our GUI appear. Okay, so I'm going to click on the bed, and now we have our GUI. All right, so let's go ahead and continue. Inside this function, we need to define what happens when the player clicks on the Yes button, and what happens when they click on the No button. So let's go ahead and start with the Yes button. We're going to say frame.Yes button, and then we're going to say mouse button one click, connect, and then function. Whenever they click on the Yes button, we want to alter the brightness of the screen. To do that, we're going to start by saying local color is going to be equal to, and we're going to say game.lighting, find first child, and then we're going to use which is A. Inside here, we're going to be looking for a color correction. So what we're doing with this line is checking to see if that color correction already exists so we don't duplicate it. And then down below here, we're going to say if not color. So this would mean that the color correction doesn't exist yet and that we need to create it. To create it, we're just going to say color is equal to instance.new. Inside the parentheses, we're going to put the color correction effect. Next, we're going to set the parent, so that's going to be the location for it. And we're going to store this in game.lighting. After that, we're going to hide the frame again. So we'll say frame.visible is equal to false. And looking back, I see it put ancestor instead of child, so let me fix that real quick. The next thing we're going to do is create a tween so that we can smoothly transition from normal lighting down to no lighting. To do that, we'll start with the tween's info. So we'll say local tween info. And that's going to be equal to tween info dot new. We're going to put parentheses and then press enter a few times. The first thing we're going to define is the time for this. So I'm going to say 5 seconds. After that property, we're going to put a comma and then press enter. The next part is the easing style. So we're going to say enum dot easing style. For this one, I'm going to choose linear. There's a couple different options for this, and I'll leave a link in the description so you can see how the different options look. After the easing style is going to be the direction. So we're going to say enum dot easing direction. For this one, I'm going to say in out. And then we just have to remember to add commas after each property. The next property is going to be the number of times it repeats. So I'm going to say 0. After that will be either true or false if you want it to reverse or not. So we want it to reverse. So we're going to go from normal lighting down to no lighting and then back to the normal lighting. So we're going to put true here. And then finally will be the delay time, and we're going to say 0. After that, we need to create the tween and then play it. So to create it, we're going to say local tween is going to be equal to game get service. Inside the parentheses, we're going to put tween service. Outside the parentheses, we're going to say colon, create. We're going to put parentheses. The first part is going to be the object that we're going to tween, so that's going to be the color correction. We're going to pass the tween info. And then the final part will be the property that we want to change. We're going to put that in curly brackets. We're going to be changing the brightness. And we want to have that go down to -1. Okay, so after we create it, we're going to play it. So we'll say tween, colon, play. We're going to wait for it to be completed by saying tween dot completed, colon, wait. And then after it's done, we're going to get rid of the correction by saying color, colon, and destroy. Okay, so let's go ahead and test out this part, make sure it's working. Okay, so we'll go ahead and click on the bed. We'll press yes. We can see it goes from the normal lighting down to no lighting. And then after it gets there, it's going to reverse back to the normal lighting. Everything looks good so far, so the last thing we need to do is define what happens when the player clicks the no button. Back on the local script, we're going to locate this end right here that has a parenthesis, and we're going to press enter. To define what happens when the no button is pressed, we're going to start by saying frame dot no button dot mouse button one click colon connect. Inside here we'll put function and parentheses. And the only thing we want to do if the player clicks on the no button is hide the frame. So we're just going to say frame dot visible is equal to false. And that's it for the script. So let's go ahead and test everything together. Okay, so if the player clicks on the bed, they're going to see the GUI. If they click on the no button, it's just going to hide it. And then if they click on the yes button, it's going to get dark and then light again. If you have multiple players in your game, it's only going to change the lighting for the player that clicks on the bed. So right now I'm player 1. So if I click on the bed here and then press yes, you can see that only player 1's screen is getting dark. Player 2 over here on this side has no change. Alright, so that's going to be it for this video. I hope you enjoyed and stay tuned for the next one.